Lion before the eyes of a fragile child who dreams of the untouchable until the impossible happens. Golden afternoon light streamed through the metal bars of the Riverside Zoo's African exhibit, casting amber shadows that danced across the worn wheels of his chair. The 12-year-old boy had rolled himself to the very edge of the viewing area, his thin fingers gripping the metal railing until his knuckles turned white against the chrome. Behind him, the cacophony of families, school groups, and weekend visitors faded into a distant hum, as if someone had turned down the volume on everything except this moment. The lion lay 30 feet away on a sun-warmed boulder, magnificent and motionless. His mane caught the light like spun copper, each strand seeming to hold fire within it. Scars crisscrossed his massive shoulders, old wounds that spoke of battles fought and won, of a life lived without compromise. But it was his eyes that held Marcus captive, amber depths that seemed to see straight through the glass, through the distance, through every barrier that had ever stood between the boy and the world he dreamed of touching. Those eyes found his, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition so profound it made his breath catch. In that gaze, he saw no pity, no careful gentleness, no whispered concerns about what he couldn't do. The lion looked at him as if he were seeing another king. "Marcus, honey, don't get too close to the glass." His mother's voice floated over from behind, tinged with that familiar note of protective worry that had soundtracked his entire life. Sarah Chen approached with careful steps, her nursing shoes silent against the concrete. Even on their rare family outings, she moved like she was still in the pediatric wing of St. Mary's Hospital, ready to catch a falling child or steady an unsteady patient. But Marcus barely heard her. The lion had risen now, padding closer to the barrier with liquid grace. Each step was poetry in motion, power contained but never hidden, muscles rippling beneath golden fur like water flowing over stone. The great cat stopped just at the metal bars, close enough that Marcus could see the individual whiskers on his muzzle, the way his nostrils flared as he breathed. "He's beautiful," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. The lion tilted his head as if he'd heard. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, boy and beast regarded each other through the metal bars. The barriers between them might as well have been an ocean, might as well have been the distance between Earth and stars. Dr. James Chen appeared at his wife's shoulder, medical bag in hand, despite this being a family day off. Old habits died hard for an orthopedic surgeon, especially one whose own son bore the invisible weight of shortened tendons and weakened bones. "We should probably head to the next exhibit," he said softly, checking his watch. "The penguin feeding starts in 20 minutes. Marcus wanted to tell them that penguins were fine, that penguins were safe and predictable, and exactly the kind of thing everyone expected him to be excited about. Penguins waddled and stumbled and made people laugh. Penguins didn't make anyone uncomfortable, but lions were different. Lions commanded respect. Lions were never objects of pity. 5 more minutes, Marcus asked, not taking his eyes off the magnificent creature before him. "Please." Sarah exchanged a glance with her husband, one of those silent parental conversations that happen in microseconds. They'd driven 3 hours from their small town to bring Marcus here, to give him something special for his 12th birthday. The zoo had been his request, not the usual suggestions of museums or theaters with accessible seating and ramps that felt more like accommodations than adventures. 5 minutes, Sarah agreed, settling onto a nearby bench. "But then we really do need to keep moving." Marcus nodded absently, already lost again in the lion's gaze. The great cat had settled onto his haunches now, tail flicking with languid patience. It was as if he were waiting for something, though Marcus couldn't imagine what. The boy's mind wandered to the dream he'd had the night before, the same one that visited him most nights, though he'd never told his parents about it. In the dream, he was running, Not the careful, assisted steps he managed during physical therapy, but real running. Wind in his hair, feet pounding against earth, legs strong and sure beneath him. In the dream, he could chase butterflies through tall grass, climb trees to touch the sky, race his bicycle down steep hills without fear of falling. In the dream, he was powerful. A group of teenagers pushed past, their laughter sharp and careless. One of them, a boy about Marcus's age with grass stains on his soccer jersey, stopped to stare openly at the wheelchair, his expression cycling through curiosity, discomfort, and something that might have been fear, as if paralysis were contagious, as if sitting down made Marcus fundamentally different from everyone else in the world. The familiar heat of shame crawled up Marcus's neck. He'd learned to recognize that look, to brace himself for the whispered questions kids thought he couldn't hear. What's wrong with him? Why can't he walk? Was he born like that? The questions always came with a particular tone, part fascination, part relief that it wasn't them in the chair. But when Marcus looked back at the lion, the shame dissolved. The great cat was still watching him with those knowing amber eyes. And in them, Marcus saw something he'd never seen in any human gaze, absolute acceptance. The lion didn't see a broken boy. He saw Marcus. "You understand, don't you?" Marcus murmured to the glass. "What it's like to be caged." The lion's ear twitched, as if in response. Marcus had been born 3 months early, his tiny body fighting battles most people would never know about. Cerebral palsy, the doctors had explained to his terrified parents, their medical terms falling like stones into still water. Spastic diplegia, reduced muscle tone, developmental delays possible, the future uncertain. He'd spent his first year in and out of hospitals, his world defined by the sterile white walls of the NICU, the constant beeping of monitors, the gentle hands of nurses who spoke to him in soft, encouraging voices. His parents had learned to navigate a new language of therapy schedules and adaptive equipment, their dreams reshaping themselves around their son's needs. But Marcus had surprised them all. He'd learned to sit, to crawl, to transfer himself from bed to chair with determination that left his therapists shaking their heads in wonder. His mind was sharp, his humor intact, his spirit, despite everything, unbroken. He'd mastered his wheelchair like other kids mastered bicycles, learned to navigate curbs and doors and the endless subtle barriers that the walking world never noticed. Yet for all his adaptations, all his small victories, there remained a vast territory of human experience that felt forever out of reach. The simple act of standing eye to eye with another person, the freedom to go anywhere without calculating ramps and accessible bathrooms, the unconscious ease of moving through the world without drawing stares or inspiring uncomfortable pity. Most of all, the ability to be seen as strong. The lion rose again, stretching with feline luxury before padding closer to the glass. This close, Marcus could see every detail, the white patch beneath his chin, the way his muscles bunched and released with each breath, the ancient wisdom in his amber gaze. The nameplate beside the exhibit read, "Aslan, African lion, age 14, rescued from illegal captivity." Rescued. Marcus wondered what it felt like to be freed from one cage, only to find yourself in another, albeit a more comfortable one. Did Aslan remember the wild? Did he dream of vast savannas and endless horizons, of hunting beneath African stars? "He likes you," a voice said beside him. Marcus turned to find an elderly zookeeper approaching, her khaki uniform worn soft with years of service. Her name tag read Eleanor, Senior Animal Care Specialist, and her eyes held the same quiet wisdom Marcus had seen in veterinarians and the best nurses, people who understood that healing happened in silence as much as in action. "How can you tell?" Marcus asked. Eleanor smiled, settling onto the bench beside his chair. "Aslan doesn't usually pay attention to visitors. He'll acknowledge the regulars, the staff, the volunteers. But tourists, she shook her head, you might as well be invisible to him. But you, she gestured toward the lion, who remained focused entirely on Marcus. He's been watching you since you arrived. Why? Animals know things we don't, Eleanor said simply. They see past the surface, past what we think matters. Aslan sees something in you. Marcus felt a flutter of hope in his chest, fragile as a soap bubble. My parents think I should focus on realistic goals, safe things. They worry about me getting hurt, or... He trailed off, unable to voice the deeper fear that he might dream too big, reach too far, and discover that even his wildest hopes had limits. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, watching Aslan pace slowly along the glass. You know, when we first brought Aslan here, he wouldn't eat, wouldn't interact with anyone. The previous facility had kept him in a concrete cell, barely large enough for him to turn around. He'd forgotten how to be a lion. What changed? Time, patience, and a little girl who refused to give up on him. Eleanor's eyes crinkled with memory. She came here every weekend for months, just talking to him through the glass, reading him stories, showing him pictures she'd drawn. Everyone told her parents she was wasting her time, that Aslan was too traumatized, too far gone, but she believed he could heal. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. Did he? Look at him, Eleanor said softly. As if summoned by her words, Aslan moved to the glass directly in front of Marcus and settled into a sphinx-like position, his great head held high, his gaze steady and proud. The afternoon sun caught his mane and turned him into something from legend, a creature of myth made real. The little girl's name was Emma, Eleanor continued. She had leukemia, spent most of her time in hospitals, just like Aslan spent his time caged. But she saw something in him that no one else could see. She saw his strength. Marcus's throat tightened. What happened to her? She fought her battle like a lion, Eleanor said quietly, and in the end, she won. She's 23 now, studying veterinary medicine. She still visits Aslan sometimes. The weight of the story settled over Marcus like a warm blanket. Here was proof that impossible things could happen, that connection could bridge any distance, that seeing and being seen mattered more than all the barriers in the world. His parents approached from behind, and Marcus could feel their gentle urgency. Time to move on, other exhibits to see, a schedule to maintain. The safe, predictable path through a day designed not to disappoint or overwhelm. I want to touch him, Marcus said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah and James exchanged another look, this one heavy with concern. Sweetie, Sarah began carefully, that's not possible. The glass is there for everyone's safety. I know it's not possible, Marcus interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. I know it's crazy, but I want to touch him anyway. Eleanor studied the boy's face for a long moment, seeing something there that made her decision for her. What if I told you, she said slowly, that sometimes impossible things happen here? Not often, not for everyone, but sometimes for the right person at the right moment. Eleanor. Doctor, Chen warned, his medical instincts kicking in. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but I'm suggesting, Eleanor said, rising from the bench with purpose, that some rules exist to be broken, carefully, responsibly, but broken nonetheless. She turned to Marcus, her eyes serious. Would you like to meet Aslan properly? The question hung in the air like a held breath. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs, felt the familiar weight of his parents, protective love pressing down on him, felt the lion's amber gaze drawing him forward into possibility. Yes, he whispered. What happened next would become family legend, though they would never quite agree on all the details. Eleanor made a phone call, spoke in low, urgent tones to someone with authority. Papers were signed, waivers acknowledged, careful protocols followed. The zoo's head veterinarian was consulted. Safety measures were discussed and implemented. But before any of that administrative magic happened, before the miraculous machinery of human kindness could grind into motion, there was this: Marcus rolling his chair backward from the public viewing area as Eleanor guided him toward a door marked "Staff Only." "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked for the fourth time, her nurse's training warring with her mother's heart. "I'm sure," Marcus said, though his voice shook slightly. The behind-the-scenes area of the lion exhibit was a different world. Concrete floors and chain-link fencing, the honest smell of hay and wild animal. Eleanor led them through a maze of corridors that felt like the backstage of a theater, all functional beauty and hidden machinery. And then they were there, in a small viewing area, separated from Aslan's enclosure by 2 layers of fencing and a narrow service corridor. The lion was only 15 feet away now, close enough that Marcus could hear his breathing, could see the individual hairs of his magnificent mane. "Now what?" James asked, his voice tight with protective anxiety. Eleanor smiled. "Now we wait. Aslan will decide what happens next." If you're finding yourself moved by Marcus's journey so far, you're not alone. Stories like this remind us why courage comes in so many forms. Like this story, and subscribe for more narratives that celebrate the extraordinary strength found in the most unexpected places. For 20 minutes, they waited. Marcus sat perfectly still in his chair, hands folded in his lap, watching Aslan pace the length of his enclosure. The lion would walk to the far end, pause, turn and return, always stopping at the same spot directly in front of Marcus. Each time, their eyes would meet, and Marcus felt that same electric recognition. A conversation happening in a language older than words. His parents stood behind him, Doctor, Chen's hand resting protectively on Marcus's shoulder. Sarah quietly taking photos she wasn't sure she'd ever be brave enough to look at again. Eleanor had retreated to give them space, but Marcus could feel her presence like a blessing, her belief in impossible things making them suddenly impossibly possible. Then Aslan did something extraordinary. The great cat approached the inner fence and lay down, pressing his body against the chain link. He extended one massive paw through a gap in the fencing, claws retracted, golden fur catching the filtered sunlight. The paw rested there, patient and still, an invitation written in the language of trust. Marcus stared at the outstretched paw, his heart racing so fast he could hear it in his ears. 3 feet of space separated him from the fence, 3 feet that might as well have been a canyon. In his chair, he couldn't reach. The mathematics of his limitations were stark and unforgiving. "I can't," he whispered, the words bitter as medicine. "I can't reach him." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then Sarah Chen did something that would define her as a mother for the rest of her life. She knelt beside her son's chair, her eyes level with his. "What if you could?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked at her, confusion and hope warring in his expression. "Dr. Peterson always says you're stronger than you know," Sarah continued, referring to Marcus's favorite physical therapist. "What if we helped you stand? Just for a moment. Just long enough?" James started to protest. The medical risks, the potential for injury, the careful protocols they'd spent years establishing to keep their son safe. But Sarah held up her hand, her nurse's authority overriding his surgeon's caution. "Sometimes," she said, her voice steady with sudden certainty, "safe isn't what our children need most." Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes. His mother had never, ever suggested anything that wasn't medically prudent, never encouraged him to push beyond the careful boundaries his condition demanded. For her to offer this now, to risk this much, felt like being handed the keys to the universe. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sure," Sarah said, and in her eyes Marcus saw the same fierce love that had kept vigil beside his hospital bed for months when he was born, the same determination that had fought insurance companies and school districts and every system that tried to put limits on her son's potential. James took a shaky breath, then nodded. Together, his parents positioned themselves on either side of his chair. With infinite care, they helped Marcus transfer his weight to his legs, supporting him as he found his balance. His muscles, weak from years of relying on wheels instead of steps, trembled with the effort, but they held. For the first time in months, Marcus stood. The world looked different from this height. Not dramatically different, but subtly, importantly changed. The lion seemed closer, more real, more possible. Aslan watched this transformation with what could only be described as approval, his tail twitching once in acknowledgement. With his parents supporting him, Marcus took one careful step forward, then another. Each movement was deliberate, precious, earned through years of physical therapy and determination. His legs shook with effort, but they carried him forward until he stood at the inner fence, close enough to hear Aslan's breathing, close enough to smell the wild musk of a creature who had never forgotten his origins. Aslan's paw was still extended through the fence, patient as stone. Marcus reached out with a trembling hand. The moment their skin, boy's palm, lion's pad, made contact, everything changed. The lion's paw was warm, surprisingly soft, enormous enough to dwarf Marcus's entire hand. But it was gentle, so gentle, as if Aslan understood exactly how precious and fragile this moment was. Marcus felt the lion's strength through that touch, not just physical power, but something deeper. The unshakable confidence of a creature who had never doubted his own worth, who had survived captivity and emerged with his spirit intact. In that contact, Marcus felt all his own strength reflected back to him, magnified. Every day he'd pulled himself from bed despite pain, every hour of therapy he'd endured, every moment he'd chosen hope over despair, every time he'd smiled when the world expected him to break. Aslan rumbled, not quite a purr, not quite a growl, but something between the two. A sound of recognition, of greeting, of acknowledgement between kindred spirits. "You see me," Marcus whispered to the lion, tears streaming down his face. "You really see me." The lion's eyes, ancient and wise, seemed to say, "I have always seen you." Behind him, Marcus heard his mother's soft sob, felt his father's hand tighten on his shoulder. Eleanor had returned with a small crowd of other zookeepers, drawn by the unprecedented sight of Aslan voluntarily making contact with a visitor. But Marcus was aware of all this only dimly. His entire universe reduced to the point where his hand met the lion's paw, where two caged spirits recognized each other across the impossible distance between their worlds. They stayed like that for exactly 97 seconds. Marcus would remember the count later, though at the time it felt like both an instant and an eternity. Then Aslan slowly withdrew his paw, touched his nose to the fence one final time, and padded back to his boulder with the dignity of a king returning to his throne. Marcus's legs gave out, and his parents caught him, lowering him gently back into his chair. But something fundamental had shifted. He sat straighter now, his chin lifted, his eyes bright with tears and triumph. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice strong despite his shaking. "Oh, did you see what just happened?" "We saw," Sarah whispered, wiping tears from her own cheeks. "We all saw." The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. Not the careful silence of people trying not to talk about difficult things, but the reverent hush that follows miracles. Marcus stared out the window at the rolling countryside, his hand still tingling where it had touched the lion's paw, his mind replaying every second of their encounter. When they reached their small town, with its familiar streets and predictable routines, nothing looked the same. The houses seemed smaller, the horizons seemed wider, the possibilities seemed infinite. Marcus had touched the untouchable, had connected with something wild and free and powerful, and in doing so had discovered something wild and free and powerful within himself. That night, as his parents tucked him into bed, Marcus asked a question that made them both pause. "Do you think Aslan dreams of the savannah?" Sarah smoothed his dark hair away from his forehead. "I imagine he dreams of many things." "I dream of running," Marcus said quietly. "Every night I dream of running. But today I realize something. I don't need to run to be strong. I don't need to walk to be free. I just need to remember that I'm a lion too." James bent to kiss his son's forehead, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You've always been a lion, Marcus. We just forgot to tell you often enough." 3 months later, Marcus started a blog called Caged Lions, writing about his experiences and connecting with other kids who felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. He wrote about Aslan, about the moment their worlds touched, about the strength that exists in all of us if we're brave enough to claim it. The blog grew, slowly at first, then faster as word spread about the boy who wrote with such fierce honesty about finding power in powerlessness, about discovering that true freedom had nothing to do with the ability to walk and everything to do with the courage to dream. Letters arrived from children around the world, kids in hospitals, kids in wheelchairs, kids who felt different or broken or invisible, but also letters from adults who had forgotten how to dream, from parents learning to see their children's strength instead of their limitations, from teachers and doctors and strangers who had been moved by Marcus's words to look at their own lives differently. A year after their first meeting, Marcus returned to the zoo. Aslan was waiting at the glass, as if he'd never moved, as if he'd been holding vigil for this exact moment. The lion approached the barrier immediately, and once again, Eleanor made the impossible possible. This time, Marcus didn't need his parents' help to stand. His legs were stronger now, his balance more sure, his confidence unshakable. This time, when he reached through the fence to touch Aslan's magnificent head, he stood on his own 2 feet. "Thank you," he whispered to the lion, his voice carrying the weight of everything that had changed. Thank you for showing me who I really am." Aslan's purr rumbled through the afternoon air like distant thunder, and in that sound Marcus heard the echo of every impossible dream that had ever come true, every caged door that had ever swung open, every moment when the untouchable had been touched and the world had been forever changed. As they prepared to leave that day, Marcus paused at the entrance to the lion exhibit. A new group of visitors had arrived. A family with a little girl in leg braces, her eyes wide with wonder as she caught her first glimpse of Aslan. Marcus watched her face transform, saw the same recognition he had felt flicker in her expression. Without hesitation, he rolled his chair over to her family. "He likes visitors who understand," Marcus said to the girl, his voice gentle with new authority, "especially the brave ones." The little girl looked at him, then at his chair, then back at his face. But in her eyes, Marcus saw none of the pity or discomfort he'd grown accustomed to. Instead, he saw curiosity, respect, and something that looked remarkably like recognition. "Are you brave?" she asked. Marcus smiled, thinking of amber eyes and gentle paws, of dreams made real and strength discovered in the most unexpected places. "We all are," he said. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us." As the Chen family walked toward their car, Marcus felt Aslan's gaze following them. He turned back once to wave, and the great lion lifted his magnificent head in what could only be described as a regal nod, one king acknowledging another. The boy who had come to the zoo looking for something he couldn't name had found it in the most impossible place. In the eyes of a caged lion, he had discovered his own wild heart. In the touch of a creature who embodied everything he thought he could never be, he had learned that strength comes in countless forms, that freedom lives in the spirit regardless of the body that houses it, and that sometimes the most profound journeys happen not when we travel the farthest, but when we finally come home to ourselves. Marcus Chen had touched the untouchable, but more importantly, he had touched the truth that had always lived within him, that he was already, and had always been, exactly as powerful as he needed to be. The last rays of sunlight painted the zoo golden as they drove away, and in that light, boy and lion carried each other's strength into the growing dusk. Forever changed by the day, the impossible became inevitable, and two caged spirits discovered they had been free all along.